welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our special guest is Father Robert Barron, author of Word on Fire, Proclaiming the Power of Christ, published by Crossroads. Welcome, Father Barron.
It's good to be with you.
EWTN's Bookmark. A lot of people would recognize you from not only being on EWTN in the past, but also being on television in general. Where is it? WGN in Chicago, nationally,
yeah,
right?
I'm on the WGN superstation around the country.
Right.
So
people get on cable and on the dish and direct.
Right. So I hope that a lot of people see it on that venue.
And how did you end up on that? End up doing that?
Well, I've had this great passion, to evangelize using the media, as of course you do too. And we were able to, secure some time, to buy some time, and why not? I want to get the message out as broadly as possible. And of course, WGN is a Chicago-based station, so.
And that's your hometown, right?
My hometown, yeah.
And that's your home diocese as well?
It is, yeah.
Okay, and you are right now the chair of?
I'm the Francis Cardinal George Professor of Faith and Culture at Mundelein Seminary, so I have an endowed chair there.
And what does that mean? For a lot of our audience, sometimes you hear that academically. What does that mean?
It means you're in an endowed position. I mean, it's been paid for and you've been established as a professor. Usually it means you've got a little less immediate teaching responsibility. You might give lectures or a course or two, and it gives you more freedom. So in my case, freedom to do this work in preaching and evangelizing and using the media. Okay,
and that's what we're going to talk about a little later. Let's just talk first, since this is a book show predominantly, Word on Fire, which has a larger meaning for you, which we'll talk about in a minute. This particular, Proclaiming the Power of Christ. Now these are actually homilies you've given on radio.
Yeah.
How so?
For the past 10 years, I've had a radio program where I give the weekly sermon. And usually when I do those, I'm working off of notes, and I give the sermon in a more spontaneous way. So I finally sat down, I selected 20 or so of those, and I wrote them up in a more formal way. But they're based upon these sermons I gave on the radio.
How did you decide which ones you were going to focus on?
I think they fall into certain patterns. One's about God, one's about Jesus, about the Spirit, about the church, and about the engagement with the culture. Right. So kind of walking through the creed, Father, Son, Spirit, Church, and then how all this engages the culture. I chose according to those categories.
Right, and so there's 6 different parts you have in here. I'm assuming that faith and culture really plays a big part in everything you do, right?
Yeah, it's the assignment that Cardinal George gave me. About 5 years ago, he took me aside, literally at the seminary, and he said, I'd like you to jumpstart evangelization. I'd like you to work on evangelizing the culture. John Paul II, of course, that was maybe his major motif. And he asked Cardinal George one time very pointedly, what are you doing to evangelize the culture? So the Cardinal asked me to take up some of that work. So yeah, it preoccupies me quite a bit.
When somebody says that, evangelizing the culture, what does that mean?
I think it means bringing Christ to the great institutions of the culture, so bringing Christ to the universities, to media, to communication, to the high culture and the low culture, popular culture as well as the arts. It's to bring Christ to those realms and to show that he in fact is, since he is the embodiment of the truth itself, he's the embodiment of beauty itself. He's the proper goal of all those cultural expressions.
Well, since the assumption would be if you need to bring him, he's not there now. Why isn't he?
Well, that's a complex matter, and I'd say largely because of our secularizing culture that has marginalized and privatized religion. So religion's okay as kind of a private hobby for people to have, but it shouldn't show up in the public forum. And that, of course, is inimical to biblical religion. Because God, precisely as the very ground and source of being, has to do with everything. You can't marginalize God. You can't privatize God. And so that's the challenge of anyone that wants to evangelize the culture, is to make that argument, to make that case.
Do you think we're succeeding better today than we had been?
Yes, I do. I think maybe because of John Paul II's influence, and people like Richard John Newhouse and many others who have been articulating this vision of a public religion. And I think people see the logic of it, that you can't, logically speaking, privatize that which has to do with everything. If God is a deist God, a distant supreme being that's vaguely related to the world, then you could, in principle, privatize or marginalize that God. But Thomas Aquinas, my great intellectual hero, calls God ipsum esse, the sheer act of to be itself. Therefore, God is implicated in all things. He can't be marginalized or privatized.
Well, let's focus on this particular book just at the top of the program. You talk about that you have your whole life long you've been fascinated by the power of the spoken word. And you talk about Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy and Fulton Sheen. When is it you came to realize you had such an interest in the spoken word?
I don't know. As a little kid, I remember being captivated by great public speakers. I mentioned there that you listen to Martin Luther King, and he really sings more than speaks. There's a incantatory quality to King's, preaching. And I tell the story there when I was, I think, a sophomore in high school. We had to, in English class, give a speech. We had to get in front of the class and give a speech. And I chose John F. Kennedy's inaugural address. And I gave that speech in front of, 20 of my classmates. But the experience of it kind of thrilled me as I moved into the power of those words. And the spoken word just hit me as something extremely powerful. So to become a public speaker of God's holy word is about as good as you can get, I think, in terms of the excitement of a vocation.
Well, as you mentioned, with the homily, it's a spoken word. Now you've got the homilies for people to read.
Yeah, right. And it's a bit of a declension, you might say, from the sheer power of the spoken word, but it gives you the advantage of being able to meditate on it, return to it, to savor the language in a different way. But I do love the kind of viva voce quality of a homily.
Well, you also mentioned the whole idea that, the Catholic liturgical context, hence these homilies can't usually be longer than 15 minutes, otherwise people, I guess, get up and leave or complain. But is that some of the reason why the preaching in the Catholic Church, or at least the general impression isn't as good as what people get in Protestant churches?
Yeah, I mean, we did de-emphasize it. Think even of the great John Henry Newman. When he was an Anglican, he gave 45-minute, beautifully crafted homilies. You can still read them. When he became a Catholic, he put aside that style. He would go into the pulpit with a few notes and would preach for 10 minutes or so. And he said, well, it's just not the Catholic style to give a 45-minute, kind of a learned discourse. And I think we did probably de-emphasize preaching. Vatican II, of course, re-emphasizes it, and the primacy of the word. Even saying the priest, primum officium, the first office of the priest is to preach, to proclaim the word. So I think we've been reviving, the importance of it.
Now you say here, if it is Christ who speaks in these sermon essays, and if you take the time to listen, you will change. And then you go to a mention about Fulton Sheen, and I thought this was interesting. Of course they went back and talking about the Magi returning. Of course they went back by a different road. No one comes to Christ and ever goes back the same way he came.
Yeah, it's magnificent commentary. It's Sheen's about the Magi going back home by a different route. And see, that's true. If you confront Christ, or better, his word confronts you, it will change you. Because the divine word is a creative word. Dabar in the Hebrew, the word of God that goes forth, and let there be light, and there was light. Let the earth come forth, and it came forth. And then in Jesus' mouth, Lazarus come forth, and he came forth. Little girl, get up, and she gets up. This is my body, this is my blood. There's the word of Jesus that's not just descriptive, it is creative. The same is true of good preaching. If it really is Christ's word that is speaking through you, it will have that transformative effect.
Now you say, when I was studying the art of preaching in a seminary, I took in a method that was all the vogue at the time, rooted in Paul Tillichs' theology. And you kind of talk about how you did that and how you walked away from that. Explain.
Yeah. Tillichs' method is a method of correlation. It tends to correlate experience to the Bible. Experience raises the great questions, the Bible gives the answer. The theologian or preacher tries to correlate the two. And that sounds, of course, reasonable enough. And as far as it goes, there is value to it. But here's the danger. The danger is my experience, my question, now becomes the interpretive grid for the Bible, not vice versa. Preaching does have to do with experience. It's meant to bring the Word of God to life. But it's the Bible that provides the interpretive lens, not experience. The Bible isn't positioned by my question or my experience. Rather, my questions are changed by the Bible. My experience is interpreted by the Scripture. So I think the preacher should lead with the Bible, lead with the great patterns that occur in the Bible, and then use those as the interpretive grid for experience. Here's what I found. When I was trained to preach, most people in my generation, we were trained to begin very much with experience, do a lot with stories, do a lot with things that have happened to you, and then correlate it to the Bible. But then about 10 years after I was ordained, I was teaching a course called the Christology of the Poets and Preachers. I wanted to see what's the Christology that emerges from the great preachers of our tradition. So I read, Origen,
the early church fathers,
and up to Bernard and Aquinas and Newman and Chesterton and so on. And what I found was no one operated that way. No one started with their experience and then brought the Bible in sort of through the back door. They began massively with the Bible and then brought it as the interpretive lens or grid to experience. And I think there is a major shift there in how we think about preaching and then how we do it practically.
Well, it sounds interesting in the sense of of transposing that and doing that. What was the net effect when that wasn't going on with the first version, the Tillich view? How was that
the net effect,
a negative for people?
Yes, I think it's a domestication of the Bible. It draws the Bible too much into the arena of my own experience, and therefore domesticates it, takes the teeth out of it. You know, it makes it too tame.
Okay.
The idea is to allow the Bible in all of its power to shake you, to change you, to make you ask new questions. When my question becomes the point of departure, then the answer becomes rather bland and domesticated.
Right, and I can kind of adjust how I want things to go depending on what my lens is, right?
Right, right.
So I can keep away from something that might be a little too threatening.
Who interprets whom? You know, one of the inspirations there, I mentioned Paul Tillich as a proponent of the method of correlation. His great opponent on the Protestant side was Karl Barth. And Karl Barth said, my job as a theologian is to bring you on a tour of the biblical world, to bring you into this densely textured, strange, surprising world of the Bible, and then show you how your life's going to change by that experience. It's not to draw the Bible into your world and to make it intelligible. It's to draw you into the Bible and make you different.
Near the end of the book, you use the phrase talking about one of the problems out there is a tone deafness in regard to the Word of God. What did you mean?
Yeah, it's in that sermon about Ephatha, be open, when Jesus puts his fingers in the man's ears. It's a great metaphor, I think, that story. Someone who's deaf to the Word of God, he can't hear, and therefore can't speak. So if you can't hear the Word of God clearly, you're not going to articulate it clearly either. I think we will take in spiritual things, whether it's from the Dalai Lama or it's from a New Age avatar or it's wherever. And we say, well, that's spiritual talk. We're not as adept at making discriminations. What's really legitimate, focused spiritual talk and what's sort of vague or generic spiritual talk? And so it's a kind of attunement to the specificity of Christian revelation. I compare it there to a musical ear. You know, I might just hear a song or I hear a melody, but a really finely tuned musical ear can make great subtle discriminations. I think we've lost some of that. We become tone deaf to the particularity of the Christian song. Jesus puts his fingers in the deaf man's ears and sets up almost like an electrical current. You know, he prays, Ephatha, be opened, as though the power of God now comes into that man. And that enables him to hear and then to speak. Right. Why are we so inarticulate so often about the faith? Well, we can't hear it properly. You know?
Is it because it's been drowned out by the other noises of the world and the culture? Or?
That's part of it, yeah. That's part of it. We just hear so much.
Are people afraid to speak the truth?
Yeah, that's part of it too. You know, so there's a kind of a moral issue. But also just, the competing voices of the culture. How do you hear it? How do you hear it clearly and plainly and with discrimination?
Right. One other thing you talk about in talking about these homilies, you say, I learned to be patient with the Bible. What did you mean by that?
That's it. That goes back to the Tillich thing. Too often, I think, in our preaching, we say, well, let's begin with my experience. And then I'll bring the Bible in as a little illustration. So there's a little correlation here to the Bible. You've got to be patient with the Bible precisely in its strangeness. Here's a comparison. We all watched the Lord of the Rings movies a few years ago. And the Lord of the Rings story begins with Bilbo Baggins' birthday party, remember? And in the book, it's about 75 pages. And you think, when will this rollicking story get underway? Why am I spending all this time at Bilbo's birthday party? Well, Tolkien said, I've got to get you acclimated to a new world. This world full of strange characters and orcs and elves and everything else, with its own topography, its own weather, its own style of speaking. You've got to get into that world, and then I can tell you the story. He's patient, and he wants the reader to be patient so he can learn this new world.
Isn't that difficult, though, in a world we live in today with, instantaneous information and, Twittering and YouTubing and, I don't have time for this, my Facebook page, quick.
Yes, it is a problem. And I face that as a teacher at the seminary, where I'll say, I'd like you to read these 100 pages of the Confessions for next class, or I want you to read, these questions from the Summa. And it's to, the MTV and post-MTV generation. Yeah, it is a problem.
How do they react when you say that? They think you're kidding? Or?
Probably at first, yeah. But they do it. But it does take patience. It does take a lot of discipline. And so that's the patience with the Bible, is I know this text is strange. I know this text is puzzling and disturbing. I know it's part of a world that's not yours. Good, good. It's the Word of God. Have patience with its peculiarity.
Now, Word on Fire, that's the title of this book we're talking about with the homilies, but it also has a greater meaning to a whole, ministry that you have,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. About 10 years ago, I started this ministry in the media and using radio and TV and the internet. And we call it Word on Fire because for me, the great biblical text is I've come to light a fire on the earth. That's the one that's always moved me, that Jesus has come not kind of as a non-threatening figure, but he's come to set the world on fire. And so the Word, if it's really Christ's Word, is a fiery word, transformative word. So that's the name I gave to this general ministry I've got.
When people hear that, do you ever get a pushback inside the church? Oh, it's kind of aggressive, and that's not the kind of Jesus we've gotten used to over the last 30 years.
Yeah, not really. Although I do understand the point. I think of Chesterton, said that in front of every church there ought to be a statue of the gentle Jesus, who's certainly portrayed in the Gospels, but also he said a statue of the fiery Jesus in full flight of anger, because he's also depicted in the Gospels, and both Christs ought to be represented. But see, I would say this: God wants us to be fully alive. Whenever God says no, it's simply a no to a no. It's always a yes. God's always a yes. The glory of God is a human being fully alive, Irenaeus said, one of my other great heroes. And so the fiery word of God that's meant to change you is always a word of life. It's always a word of salvation.
Well, speaking of statue, one time there was a horrible movie that was made a number of years ago, and one of the things that had the Buddy Christ statue with Jesus kind of saying, hey, right back at you, everything's okay.
Right. And that trivializes him, and that domesticates him. That's the problem with it. He becomes someone that doesn't threaten me in any way.
Now, you're trying to reach out, obviously, as you said. We talked about this culture that moves so rapidly. Now, you're doing radio, you're doing television. We talked about GN. You've done radio in Chicago as well. And now you're also doing what? Film documentary. Really? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. It's a project that we've called Catholicism, and it's based upon or inspired by Kenneth Clark. So way back in the 70s, when I was a teenager, Lord Kenneth Clark, who was the director of the National Gallery in London, did this wonderful program where he went all over Europe, and he talked about Western civilization, but he showed it. He showed you Chartres. The first time I saw Chartres Cathedral would have been on that film when I was about 13. And that show has always stayed in my mind. And I thought, why not do something like that with Catholicism? We are a smart religion, we're a theologically sophisticated religion, and we're a beautiful religion. We use art, architecture, and so on. So I wanted to show that. And make a long story short, I proposed it to my board, and one board member said to me, you should drop whatever else you're doing and do that.
Really?
And so 5 board members then went down to Cardinal George without me, and they said, we'd like him to do this. Cardinal George said, whatever I have to do to make that happen, I will do. So he got behind it. Then we raised money, and that was a long slog. We raised the money, and then I just finished filming. We did 2 years of filming. From June 2008 until August 2010. We went to 16 countries all over the world, and I talked about the Catholic faith under 10 rubrics, 10 great categories. And I tried to go to the places that would exemplify these truths. So we went from the Holy Land to Italy, of course, to Chartres, and I studied for my doctorate up in Paris, so I love Paris and the Sainte-Chapelle and all of that. We also went to Poland, we went to the Philippines, went to Mexico, went to Calcutta, went to Uganda. So we really, I think, gave a sense of the breadth of the Catholic world.
Now, in doing that, I mean, how do you end up teaching in your chair that you don't have? You didn't spend a lot of time in a chair if you were out and about as much.
I did, because I taught 2 courses in the winter quarter. So often in the winter we didn't travel. I taught 1 course in the fall. I was off in the spring, and so we did a lot of traveling in the summer and the spring. And even in the fall, I was able to teach on a Tuesday. We often would leave on a Wednesday and come back, the following Monday.
Well, let me ask you, today, Western civilization isn't that popular, it seems, in our culture today. What makes you think something like Catholicism will be? Or is it important that it's popular?
Well, no, I mean, I think it will have an appeal because the beautiful is appealing. And say what you want about, Western culture, and there's certain, you're right, prejudice against it in the academy. I say, so what? I think people see beautiful things. How do you see Chartres and not be changed? Cardinal Lustiger, who was the Archbishop of Paris when I was a student there, of course, was from a Jewish background. His mother died in the Shoah. He was converted by a cathedral. It wasn't Notre Dame, but he went into one of the great cathedrals, and it changed him like that. Paul Claudel, the great playwright, was converted looking up at the rose window at Notre Dame. I feature that in the series because I was so captivated by it when I first went to France. I'm with Balthasar that the beautiful has a compelling power. It has a converting power. The truth does, but beauty has its own truth. So I'm wagering on that when you see Guadalupe. Not just the image and the tilma, but you see the people coming on their knees. There's something compelling about it. You see the joy on the faces of the Mother Teresa sisters in Calcutta, in the midst of the worst city I've ever been to in my life. But you see these women who are just radiant with joy. That's beautiful, and that's compelling to people. That's my wager with this program.
Now, we'd ultimately love to have it on EWTN someday, but initially, hopefully this summer, you're looking to get it, distributed through PBS or something?
Yeah. We're in a negotiation now with PBS in Chicago, and we hope around the country too. So I do have ambitions to get it out to the culture outside the church.
Sure.
But we also have a program we've developed for use within the church.
Okay, some sort of like a study program or something?
Yeah, I've written a book to go along with it. Again,
Okay.
Kenneth Clark is my inspiration. Clark wrote a beautiful book that went with civilization.
So would this be like a coffee table type book?
No, see,
or?
I wanted it not to be that. It's an 85,000 word text, so it's a pretty substantial text. But it'll have 150 photos and reproductions of artwork from the series. So I want it to be the kind of book that you would savor, that you'd read, but also you'd see the beauty of the pictures and be drawn into the whole totality of Catholicism. So we have that, but we also have a very extensive study guide that will go with all the episodes. We have questions for discussion, etc. So I'd love to see it used in parishes for adult formation, RCIA, whatever.
How would somebody use it for RCIA?
I'd love to see them march through the 10 episodes. Who is Jesus Christ? The teaching of Jesus, the mystery of God, Mary, the church, liturgy and sacraments, the saints, the last things, the prayer and spirituality, Peter and Paul and the missionary life of the church. Those are my 10 episodes. I'd love to see a group march through those 10 and to watch the show and be awash in the beauty of Catholicism as they learn it.
Right, and this isn't too triumphalistic, is it?
No, I mean, I do acknowledge, of course, we're going through, as I've said, the worst period in American Catholic Church history. I would have said, if you asked me 10 years ago or 12 years ago, I would have said 19th century when they're burning down convents. But we're going through the worst period now with this scandal. No, I acknowledge that. I talk about it in the episode on the church, for example. But I'm not afraid, though, of showing forth the splendor of the church.
Right.
I want that to come forth. Because it just annoys me that, in the minds of way too many people, the church, with its 2,000-year tradition of spirituality, theology, art, architecture, the saints, is being reduced to our current scandals. We have to deal with the current scandals, absolutely, but I don't want the church reduced to it. And so I see this program as particularly appropriate now as we're going through this struggle.
Do you think Catholics out there are looking to connect to the history of their faith? Because we find, certainly at EWTN, the early church fathers, and even just the programs we're able to provide for those who are already searching, it's that reinforcement, that connection. They know it's true. Now they have a better understanding of why it's true, and it revitalizes them.
Absolutely, and I find the more you expose people to the great tradition, the more beautiful they find it and compelling. But when I was a kid, coming of age in the late 60s and the 70s, it was the period of what I call beige Catholicism, and it was a lot of the balloons and banners.
Right, I remember string paintings.
It was not at
bridge
a high,
over troubled water. And,
right. It was not a high water mark of catechesis, but through God's grace, a young Dominican priest at Fenwick High School outside Chicago taught us the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas. I was 14. And I don't know why exactly, but it was like a bell went off. And I realized at that moment how serious religion could be, how it could engage the mind. And I was 14 years old, and I was going to the library, and I was taking off the Summa of Aquinas and trying to understand this. But it was like this moment of breakthrough for me. And that's always inspired me, that when you show the great tradition, you talk about it, you present it, people will find it compelling.
What did your parents think at the time?
My father said, kiddo, maybe you could find something a little bit easier to read. I remember he recommended to me Fulton Sheen. He said, why don't you get a book by Fulton Sheen? And I did. And it was very good advice. Because Fulton Sheen came out of that great philosophical tradition, but did it in a more appealing way, or more accessible way. But that was a huge moment for me. And I want that to happen to more people.
Well, let me ask you, just for your parents, when you were being raised up, were you raised up in what would be considered a fairly Orthodox household? Or?
Yeah, oh yeah. My parents were very devout Catholics, and we went to Mass every Sunday, and Catholicism meant a lot to them, and they communicated that to us. I think one of the tragedies was they sent us in totally good faith to Catholic schools at the time, and it was just that period. I mean, I don't really blame people. It was a time of of great confusion right after the council. I went to first grade in 1965.
Right.
So my early years in Catholic school were all in the time of, what are we going to do now?
Right.
The old is out, but the new wasn't quite there yet.
And
so I didn't really blame
a lot of people of goodwill tried to do things they thought were good. They just didn't work out.
They were people of goodwill. And so my parents, I think, at times were a little flabbergasted by what I would come home and say, here's what we're doing in religion class. What bugged me at the time, still bugs me, is religion was not seen as a serious subject. You studied English and math and science. They were serious. Religion was more like, like gym class. It was not quite as serious. And that's a tragedy.
It was kind of like, let's all get along.
Yeah, and it's tragic because we have this very rich tradition, intellectually, as you know and I know, and we have to communicate it.
Well, let me ask you just before we go. Obviously, you've got a million things, a lot of irons in the fire. Another book in the works? Or?
Yeah, I'm working on, well, I just finished the Catholicism book to go with the series, but I'm also working on a book for the Brazos Theological Commentary series. Do you know about that?
Sure.
It's a wonderful series. They have theologians talking about the biblical books. So they asked me to work on 2 Samuel. And I'm very enthused about that. It's all the stories of King David, David in Jerusalem, and the Ark of the Covenant, and all these Christological overtones. So it's a theological look at 2 Samuel. That's what I'm working on now.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Keep up the wonderful work.
My pleasure.
Hopefully follow it closely.
Good. Thanks
for
having
luck with
me
your
on.
new series. Father Robert Barron, author of Word on Fire, Proclaiming the Power of Christ, published by Crossroad, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, and look for his program coming soon to a television channel near you. I'm Doug Keck. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.